So I'll go ahead and call us to order. It is 6:01 on February 5th, and also looking at the wrong agenda. Oh my goodness, I'm just clearly a mess today.
It happens.
Okay, let's try that one more time.
Sorry, the group before ran over.
That's okay. All right, now I think I'm looking at the right agenda. I'll call us to order. So I was requested by our new chair, Councilmember Washington, to stand in as chair for one more meeting, and then we'll turn things over at our next meeting to Councilmember Washington to be chair, if that's all right with the rest of the commission. Okay, excellent. Then let's go ahead and move on to the agenda approval. Are there any changes requested by the committee for the agenda? Any requested changes?
None, Chair.
Okay, then
None
we'll
at this point.
Great, then we'll consider them adopted as is. That takes us to public comment. I do not see any members of the public present in chambers, and I just got onto the Zoom thing. I just finished updating.
Do not see any online either.
Okay, thank you. Just getting into the meeting here. There we go. I agree. I do not see anyone online. Okay, then we'll move on to the next item, which is the minutes. Are there any suggested changes or updates to the minutes?
Not at this time for me.
Seeing none, we will adopt the minutes as presented. That takes us to our first and only agenda bill, which is AB 24-021, the Snoqualmie housing target. And I believe that Development Director, there we go. My head was just city administrator, wrong name. Not giving you that promotion yet. If you could go ahead and lead us off on discussion, give us a little bit of background, and then we'll talk about this item. Thank you.
Good evening, council members. Emily Arteche, Community Development Director. This agenda bill that you have before you is a follow-up to a discussion that was held in June of 2023 when the city held a roundtable discussion on housing. And at that time, we were working through many components of the city's comprehensive plan. We've since concluded most of that analysis, which you can see in the appendices of this agenda bill, including much of the housing work, the housing strategy, middle housing, housing assessment, housing needs analysis. And today we're back with an agenda bill that would actually take the city to the next step with addressing the city's growth target. So this is a growth target reduction resolution presented to the CD committee for discussion, and then staff is asking that a motion be made to move this to the next council meeting for recommended approval. Happy to discuss the details of this resolution, but in a nutshell, the city would be asking for a growth target in housing that would equate to 719. That is a significant change from its assigned growth target in housing, which right now is 1,500.
Thank you. I like this statement right here under the analysis. I'm just going to read it because I just think it's very well said. The majority of land in the city is either built out or undevelopable due to the presence of environmentally sensitive areas, including the floodplain. The analysis found that approximately 49% of the land in the city is impacted by local regulations governing and protecting environmentally sensitive areas. Additionally, existing lots associated within the Ridge Owners Association are unlikely to see future development, including accessory dwelling units, given regulations against such development set forth in their covenants, conditions, and restrictions. And HB 1110, if I'm remembering the number correctly from last year, did not essentially remove those covenants, conditions, and restrictions from related to ADUs. I think that's one for ADUs.
Correct.
Um, within existing HOAs. It prevents future HOAs from putting those restrictions in place, but not past ones. So I just think that this really hits the nail on the head of where would all these buildings go? And furthermore, when you actually read into the analysis provided by, it was LDC, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Then they just lined out exactly which parcels are even potentially developable at all. And it doesn't add up to a whole lot. Even 719, I think, is a generous number as it is. So I think that this was very well thought out, and I think it's very well documented in the report that we got from LDC. So I support moving this forward, but I'd love to hear from the rest of the committee, their thoughts.
So Chair, I'll
Councilmember Watton.
resolution, thank you. I'll move the resolution to the revised 2044 growth targets. Second.
I'll second that.
Okay, excellent. Was there any further discussion, or are we happy with this as it is? Councilmember Watton.
Chair Johnson, I do have one very small minor change, and that is after whereas, following parentheses buildable lands, there's an extra comma.
Good catch.
What page are
Grammatical
you
error.
on?
It's page 1
Oh,
of
okay.
the resolution. It's the 4th paragraph. Or whereas, and then it's buildable lands. I looked through the rest of the document. It's lengthy.
Yeah.
And it is very well laid out. It's a reasonable target. That 719 also includes the mill site development and other developments that have not yet come online. So really, we're only looking at somewhere under, well under 500 homes left to build out. My only other comment is this, and that is it was addressed at the AMI level as well, and I think it was very detailed. I think the challenge is going to be finding those still lower tiers at 30% AMI and under, and even 50% and under, of finding the buildable, the builders and the financing that will support those. But it's something that's that we will work hard on to try to achieve that. But the 719 is much more realistic, and so I support this.
Another thing that's in the buildable lands report and in the LDC report is a number of vacant parcels that, and it goes through why those are ruled out. Some of them were ruled out not even by us due to being critical areas, but because there's some other entity that prevents us from building on them for various reasons, like near the interchange. So anyway, I just think this is very well laid out. Yeah, Councilor Washington.
I just had a couple of quick questions, being the newest member on CD here, just trying to follow the numbers. So there was original, looks like 1873, so 1,873 units. And that was a growth target from King County, correct? Is that where that number came from, the original 1,873?
You might be referring to past horizons, the 2033 horizon. So we're in a new cycle up
Okay,
to 2044 now.
so it looks like, okay, 2035,
Oh yeah, 2035,
okay.
yeah.
King County, so that was the King County growth target by the year 2018. Okay, got it. The other pieces, where is the, because it mentions 1,500 units here, section 2. Where's that number coming from?
1,500 comes from the King County wide planning policies.
Point of clarification, that's the 2044 assigned growth that we received And that's the number that we are objecting to.
Correct,
The 1,500.
correct.
Okay.
So you see that on page 2, where it shows 2019 to 2044 growth targets, housing target 1,500 residential units, and then employment target of 4,425.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Did you have?
Yes, Mayor.
So the 0 to 30%, I guess PSH and non-PSH. First of all, she did a nice job being able to change Panorama over to, I think, the low income, whereas before it was higher. It was like starting at 60%. And so that helped accounted for some of the numbers. But I also know that, I don't know that, first of all, we don't have the services, nor I don't think there are persons that are like 100, what's it, 147, that'd be the 0 to 30%. And so that was something that we would work towards, is that correct? But not necessarily make that number.
Build that number, yeah.
Right.
We are removing barriers and identifying strategies. We are not required to build these units at these AMIs by 2044.
Councilman Watton.
Thank you, Chair. Director Arteche, would that in part it being kind of the outward look to 2044, the idea of the 50% AMI is simply because of inflation growing and that they wouldn't increase their rent as fast on an already existing fully leased out property? Is that kind of the assumption, or is there some bargaining that we're hoping to engage in, or grant money to help their underlying costs? Because, you know, as a for-profit company, you have to
Panorama,
have enough money to satisfy upkeep on a
But-
property.
this is with regards to Panorama.
Yes.
Yeah, this is completely voluntary on Panorama's part, understanding that they've got the flexibility in their housing development to make these kinds of choices and decisions that best suit the customers that they're providing services to.
Follow-up question to that is, and I think I hear from the mayor, the one concern might be the supportive services that our area lacks will have an impact on you know, the health and the welfare of those residents at some point. Otherwise, it's going to put additional strain on our public safety services that we have. Is that a fair assumption of concern?
But it is a mine, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, and certainly one of the things that we're lacking that I know is very important for folks who are within that that income range is public transportation. There's just really there are limited means of getting around the area. I'll put it that way. If you don't have a car. Okay, so if there's nothing else, then we'll go ahead and send this forward to council, and we will consider this recommendation not exactly approved because we don't have the authority to approve it, but we will consider it moved on to council at the next meeting. Okay, that takes us to the EDC chair request for SMC amendments. Now, this is a recommendation from the city for how to address this letter that was sent from the chair of the Economic Development Commission to the Community Development Committee on December 1st of 2023. And this, my understanding is that this was not approved by any sort of vote or anything by the EDC, which is fine. The chair can send us a letter. That's within the rights of a chair. So what the city was asking was for us to send this back essentially to EDC to go back over it with a fine tooth comb and make any changes that they might see fit, and then have them kind of resend it to us, which I think is the proper path. I do have a couple of thoughts though myself, and then that can be passed on to EDC as well for their consideration. And I'd encourage the rest of the committee to do the same if they have thoughts on this letter. The first thing is that on the retail allocation in the historical district, they asked for an increase, or the chair asked for an increase from 75% retail to 100%. And I think that might be a bit of a reach to go to that level. For one thing, it can at some point become challenging to fill every single unit with retail. That said, that doesn't mean that we can't raise it. Maybe 75% is too low. Maybe it isn't, but that's certainly something that's worth considering. But I do think that 100 might be a little bit too far. So maybe somewhere 80 to 90, somewhere in that range-ish, I think sounds a little bit more reasonable. That's my personal opinion. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention was on the suggestion to this goes back to the conversation we had about center retail as well. There's this issue in the city where even in an area that is required to have a certain percentage, even if a unit was for whatever reason required to be retail, which there are some units that are in that category, there is a 120-day period where the landlord has to wait it out. And if that time elapses, then they can apply to the city, request a waiver from the requirement to have retail in that space. And then they can have something else fill the space, typically a service or something that's able to pay a higher rent. And so they just kind of wait it out. So the proposal here was to extend the duration from 120 days, which is about 4 months, another 2 months to 180 days. And my opinion is that it's kind of the opposite. I don't think that an extension of that period of 2 months is enough. I would like them to consider something further out than that, so that if a business really, truly can't find anybody to fill the space with retail, okay, maybe then they come for a waiver. But I'm not convinced that 180 days is enough time to fully ensure that the landlord really tried as hard as they could to and put forth a good, honest effort to fill it with retail. Now, within that 120 days or 180 days, maybe they really did try, but I don't think that that's a reasonable enough period for all possible folks who want to rent that space, who would be retail, to apply for that spot. So anyway, I think they should look at a longer duration than 180 days. Okay, so those are my thoughts on the letter, and I'll turn it over to the commission for their thoughts. Yes, Councilmember Watton.
So I believe this was part of their discussion, and by acclamation at their November, I believe, 18th meeting. These were the two things that they brought forward and passed, and then the chair was had put it in a form of a letter over to us, just for point of clarification.
Oh, thank you.
So I listened to their conversation. The concern is the downtown core, that they'd like to see more retail, especially concentration, greater concentration of businesses that are retail oriented is important in helping the vibrancy of the downtown core. And if those are limited, and we've seen that in kind of the core of the historic downtown, it will kind of discourage more retail from thriving. And plus, there's some feedback from retail stores that they'd like to see more activity, because it's just like when you go to find a fast food restaurant, you don't find them standing alone. You find 2, 3, 4 of them together, and they're in clusters. You find that in gas stations, you find that in banks. So I think that's the idea behind it. She did go on and kind of clarify what retail included.
Right.
I think the second one, and that's the unleased space waiver duration. And you kind of have this idea of being between being a business friendly community and helping to encourage landlords to encourage them to fill those spaces as best they can so that there's a greater balance. And we've seen kind of on the ridge, for instance, a tendency to fill them with service-oriented business, not retail or restaurant businesses. And sometimes that stifles. The 120 days, right now, the waiver, and I believe then it goes over to the director, if I'm correct.
That's the way it is.
In allowing for the occupancy of space by other than retail or restaurant. That's the director's prerogative. This is just simply extending it from 120 days to 180 days. So I think there's, it warrants some consideration whether we take it back, we put it over to community development. But that's kind of the gist of what I heard from the commission in their November meeting.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. And yeah, my thoughts are very similar. Again, I just think that 100 might be a little bit too much of a reach, and I think that 180 might not be enough of a reach. Councilmember Washington.
So, Councilmember Juan, it almost sounds like they're looking to maybe expand the definition of retail, kind of when I read through this. Right?
Right, yeah.
So I guess just not having the background. Currently, what is the definition of retail for downtown space?
Well, there is a very detailed retail description in the downtown historic overlay. I don't have it up handy, but I could email it out.
Okay.
I think there's a specific list of types of businesses that count as retail. Is that correct?
Correct,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I say that because, the last sentence here of the second paragraph variances, I absolutely support that. Coffee, restaurants, flowers, gift shops, sporting goods stores, absolutely. But I'm just curious, what is the current definition for or the list for our downtown retail?
Yeah. It's in the code. I
Wanna read it?
don't have it right in front of me either, but there's.
Because I mean, we look at that piece and that could positively impact the third paragraph. So the unleased space waiver duration, if we expand that definition, maybe we're not even, maybe landlords aren't waiting the 120 days. Potentially, right?
I do know that it's been an issue more on center that I'm aware of, where there are doctors' offices that are filling in. It's hard to argue those as being a form of retail. Yeah, do something?
Would you like me to pull up the downtown retail?
Please.
Sure. Yeah, let's take a look.
And so
Yeah, Councilman Washington.
just so I'm just being specific here. So this currently, that wouldn't be a definition of retail, this services piece that we kind of see there on Center Street. That wouldn't be a current definition of retail. Okay.
So here,
Left my glasses
sorry,
at. Seriously, what's your
Um,
prescription?
I can probably enlarge the text.
Thank you.
I- I thought that real estate was not a retail,
Correct, it is
estate.
not.
right? But in here it is. So I think,
Oh, interesting. So you're saying that retail is listed, or I'm sorry, what you just said, that's listed as retail.
in here.
Yeah, in the letter, in the
But
letter.
my,
Okay,
if I can
yeah, go ahead,
have a-
Mayor.
The overall concern with this letter was, first of all, there wasn't a vote. Not everyone had input on it. There were just 2 or 3 people and that not necessarily were commissioners, were adamant about trying to keep another group out of purchasing a building. So and this bypassed community development, otherwise specific correct information would have been included in there.
Mm,
So it came directly to community development
mhm,
instead of to the department director.
mm.
I also see that it says that restaurants other than drive-through
Correct. So,
do count as being retail.
but Dark Horse does not specifically, even though it is in the retail zone. So even though they do sell like foods and services, they are technically actually classified as a non-retail use.
Okay, I'm looking at C there. It says restaurants other than drive-through service and taverns. So you're saying that, oh, dark, I was thinking Black Dog. Never mind.
Yeah.
They're in business. Got it.
So if you
Yeah,
see
that's drive-through. Got it.
specifically non-retail, they would fall under that, under two.
Yes,
I can send out an email with this as well.
sure. Just as a link or something. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Councilmember Watton.
So thank you, Chair. So is it fair to say that perhaps we should take a look at the definition of what retail is?
Yeah.
And I do, just point of clarification, there was a quorum at the November meeting. There was a motion and passage, or am I missing that it wasn't done by acclamation or by consent by the entire body?
I don't believe there's any motion. No. There's a lot of discussion and then came out of it. This is sent directly to CD and not even through our department, the director.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So travel agency would be, yeah, I guess it would be retail.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point that we should also ask about, ask EDC to consider definitions. of retail.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, I mean, definitely want to take a look at it, but for some of these, definitely, I can see the advantage of expanding maybe the definition in some of these categories.
Councilmember Watton.
Thank you. My go-to is MRSC to see
Ah.
what model other cities
Ah,
have used in definition, and that
Good
may be
point.
helpful in helping us reconcile what is appropriate as designated as retail.
Yeah, to that point, that's what we did on the planning commission with a number of different things when I was serving there too, is we look at what other cities do and then copy and then kind of massage things to make it relevant to our city. So I completely agree. Councilmember Washington.
That's an excellent point. Councilmember One, and I was just thinking through that, considering other cities, what percentage of downtown, the historical district would be considered retail? So kind of modeling after other successful cities. Potentially.
Okay, other thoughts on this? Staff, do you feel like you have direction for what we're asking? Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
All right. Then that will be referred back to EDC. And that takes us to the housing policy review for the comprehensive plan. And I believe that there were some updates from the last time that we saw this. So Community Development Director Arteche, can you guide us through where we're at?
Sure, I'm going to bring Ashley Ragg up to go ahead and go over the memo that was included in the packet and explain why it is back before you today.
Hello, everyone. Would you like for me to share the memo on the screen?
Sure.
Please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're the chair.
It's okay. You will be next time.
I just need a little
That's-
information.
that's- Excellent. And even if we can't read it up there, at least people at home can. All right, go ahead and walk us through the highlights.
Yes, so there is already an existing list of goals and policies that have been put together by the Planning Commission. And we took those goals and policies and sent them to PSRC, Puget Sound Regional Council. They are kind of a guiding body to help with consistency on a larger scale. And they had a couple of recommendations specifically for housing. And you will see the letter in the packet, but to make it a little bit easier, towards the bottom of the memo are our interpretation of what they would like to see for more clarity and consistency with what the state has set forward.
And are those the two main changes in
Yes.
the talks there? Okay. Yeah, Community Development Director Teche.
Yeah, I would just like to elaborate just slightly. These are extremely minor enhancements to quality work that the Planning Commission reviewed and recommended and that you saw. Nonetheless, they are key comments from our neighboring agencies, which will help us move through the compliance review of our comprehensive plan later this year. So I just wanted to bring that small bit of information forward.
On the first one, draft goal number 1, it seems like it would read better if we didn't strike out the of. Future citizens of all economic levels.
Yeah.
More importantly,
Yeah.
though, on the second one, it did strike out the as a percentage, and it kind of inserted the part about the emergency housing, emergency shelter, et cetera. So those aren't exactly like a replacement of one concept with a related concept. It's a replacement of one concept with a completely different concept, enhancing our list. So I'm just wondering, was there a particular reason to remove the as a percentage of overall projected overall housing inventory just after the underlined part? Is there a particular reason to remove that section?
One second, I'm scrolling down to the.
That's for policy 2A.
Yes.
That's better up here. Ah, I see.
It was just to add some more specificity with the laws going in place.
I mean, I don't feel strongly about it. Just I'm wondering if removing the as a percentage could, and not saying as a percentage of yada yada yada, if that leaves open some gap for interpretation to mean something other than the as a percentage.
It would probably be possible to add it in as a provision. I think the language would have to be reworked and or maybe a separate policy also created if there's a strong feeling around that.
Okay. So then I guess the only other question would be then related to that is under the county wide planning policies, does that specifically, that capitalized phrase, countywide planning policies, does that specifically reference the percentages? And if it does, then, well, then we're covered. Because if you look there, then you'll see the percentages. Does that make sense? What I'm asking?
I see what you're saying. I personally don't know the answer to if they do enumerate those.
So that'd be my only question then, would just be to check that to make sure that that it's clear. How do we know? I guess this is why it matters. Is how do we know that we've met the target? And if there isn't something that says, here's how we know we met the targets, like saying percentages, that's already in the county-wide planning policies, which I think it is, but just to make sure, if it isn't, then we should say that just at the end. Just put the struck out part at the end of the sentence. Yeah, Community Development Director.
Yeah, so the goal here was to really include the types of housing, not the percentage of housing. So it was really important for Puget Sound Regional Council staff to know that we were specifically identifying housing for emergency housing, emergency shelters, and permanent supportive housing, in addition to the low, very low, and extremely low. So that provides the full gamut of the kinds of housing that we need to address in our housing element. And not that it was a percentage of the countywide planning policies for those groups. It was more like, make sure you address all the groups, specifically identify all the groups, don't miss a single group, because if you do, then there's a chance
get
that
cut
you
out.
have a gap.
Right.
So I think we were focusing more on the percentages and not the groups.
Okay, and I completely support that, and I agree. These are very important people. They're real people that live in Snoqualmie Valley, and they deserve to have housing.
Mhm.
And they should be included. I completely agree with that. I just want to make sure that we're clear on how we know that we've met the target. And saying the as a percentage indicates to me that we have these percentages we're supposed to meet so that we know that we have done it. I'm not saying that like we should get rid of the list. Absolutely, I agree that we should have the list there.
Mhm.
It's just more the how do we know that we've hit the target?
And it's
That's what
not-
I'm getting at.
It's not a target. It's related to the housing target, but it's not the target. I'm not sure if that came out explicitly clear. We're not required to build these. We're required to demonstrate that we could accommodate these through removing barriers. And we just need to make sure that the barriers that we were removing would allow for all of these groups identified in this list to find housing.
So when it says work towards meeting the targets established and defined, how are those established and defined in the countywide planning policies? As long as they are, then that's fine. We don't need to restate what the target is or how that is established and defined in that, if it is done so there. I'm just saying, I
Mhm.
want to make sure that it is, and
Yeah.
that it's clear.
The target would be the 719, if that's the new number that we get,
Perfect.
not the projected affordable need associated with the 719. So maybe we
Okay.
could massage it a bit to make it more clear and not commingle those together.
I just want to make sure that it is clear to someone who reads this that there is a metric, not just, and it, I think, goes to the bigger point about how do you know we're not going to leave someone out? Well, if we don't have some metric for making sure that we're not leaving people out, then people can easily get left out, even if they're in the list. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
It is, but
Yeah.
it's not going to be as scientifically proven as maybe your physics degree would like.
As long as it's defined somewhere and it's clear where you can look, I'm fine with it. That's all I'm trying to say. All right, Councilmember Washington. You have your
Yeah,
hand.
I would just ask, is it possible to just even insert that 719 number in here?
Assuming it gets approved.
But just with the target of 719.
We could maybe,
It is a bit stating the obvious. I mean, the 719 is in the countywide planning policies. Most cities don't put their growth targets for housing and employment as specific policies in their comprehensive plan because they were already required to meet all of the policies that are related to our comprehensive plan. So if
Okay.
anything, we might soften it by just, if targets becoming kind of complicated, we could look at rewording this slightly differently to focus in what PSRC really wanted us to focus in on. And that is the list, not the targets. It's the list.
Okay.
Make sure that we include every single one of these groups. If they don't fall within the low, very low and extremely low, we had to call them out by saying emergency housing, emergency shelters, and permanent supportive housing.
And then I will go to you, Councilmember Watton. So just following up on that, then perhaps where it says establish and define in the countywide planning policies is enough, and we don't need to redefine what that is here.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct.
I think I'd agree with that. All right, Councilmember Watton.
Thank you, Chair. Director Arteche, help me understand PSRC's response, page 2, second minor bullet point documenting land use capacity to address housing need of all economic segments is references back to the racial equity and displacement analysis and the fact that, are we talking about, first of all, existing housing or new housing? Because I'm trying to follow along with their reasoning and our limitations in reaching that, knowing that I somewhere between 87% and 91% are all single family residents. We have very little multifamily housing. You know, what is the intent of this? I mean, it becomes, we're so constrained on what we already have. Most of it's built out. How in the world do we find that sliver where we can change things in our comprehensive plan? And are we going to designate certain neighborhoods or certain streets that are kind of this housing opportunity zone, for the lack of a better word, so that we can meet what their expectations are? It just seems like it's a challenging thing to do. And I think that, maybe what we should counteract is, multifamily housing, preserving the small 8-unit, 12-unit apartment buildings, the few that we have, may be a better way of addressing this housing equity. I'm confused. That's I'm just trying to understand and what their point is.
Yeah, they're not telling us exactly what to do, but they're saying, make sure you include the entire list. And this policy or this comment's not directed to where or how or when or how much. They're just saying, make sure you've got the complete list. And then it's up to us to help prove to them that should somebody want to come in and build at these new AMIs, because they're going to be different AMIs, because we're going to ask for a new growth target, where we would do that. And we can talk about that in our housing element when we go back and look at our middle housing, analysis, our housing strategy plan, our housing needs analysis, and we can use strategies like the one Mayor Ross saw when she read the report, converting certain percentages that are out there at 60% to a lower AMI. Maybe another strategy would be to take a look at our residentially targeted areas and find a way to identify those. There's lots of other things that are identified in our housing strategy plan. And again, we're not building those units. We're just identifying and removing barriers and shining light on pathways that would allow this development to unfold at a number that we are going to demonstrate that is suitable for us, but we're not going to build it. I know that sounds confusing and maybe difficult, but.
And Chair, if I may ask a
Yeah,
follow-up
Councilor Juan.
question.
Yeah.
So would that possibly be the city acquiring properties for the purpose of encouraging development through RFPs? They might be delinquent on property taxes, delinquent on water.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
That
Yeah.
could be part of
yeah,
this then,
and
and we can help facilitate that, but not build it. We can help encourage that transfer and somehow figure out whether we retain ownership or we pass that along to perhaps a nonprofit or a for-profit builder.
Exactly. Yeah. And we will be identifying that in the housing element, in the appendices. We will be talking about that. We are going to show our homework and what is the potential for what exists within the city corporate limits on housing, the housing target, and these AMIs.
Thank you.
Related to that, where it says the racial equity and displacement analysis includes limited information of what historical documents were reviewed to understand the local history and context. So is that saying that one of the things that the city did through this process was to do a racial equity and displacement analysis, and that that they found that that was somewhat lacking?
Let
Is
me,
that what they were? Is
no.
that what they're saying? Okay.
let me decode that.
Yeah. Thank you.
All that means is that we have not shared any of our substantive work with them at this point. We've
Okay.
only shared the recommendation that came out of the planning commission for goals and policies, they're stating that the full body of work still needs to be presented. So it is an extension of grace on their part to say that we trust that you're doing what you're doing, but we haven't seen these
Okay.
documents yet. And so they will be seeing these documents. They will be part of our housing element and they will be substantive.
Okay, so this isn't an accusation. Got it. Yeah, and yeah, I look forward to that work as well. Okay, other thoughts on this item for now? Is there anything specifically that staff is looking for from us tonight? Just a review of this? Is this going back to planning commission to review some of these items? What's kind of the next step?
This is not intended to go back to planning commission. This is intended to go to the full council
Yep.
at a anticipated roundhouse discussion. So if we could,
Roundtable.
roundtable, sorry, roundhouse. I'm
It becomes a
mixing.
roundhouse.
Oh, I've got a roundhouse. I've got a roundhouse, an open house and a round table.
Can we have a public forum in there somewhere? Anyway, go on.
I know we have a sense of humor.
Okay.
So
uh,
if we could agree that this is the recommendation from the CD committee to the roundtable discussion, we could move along. And I think I heard
think so.
some substantive comments about keeping it simple and removing the targets and just going with compliance with the King County policies. Is that correct?
Yep, I'm in
Okay.
agreement with that. See, committee.
I agree.
Okay, then if there are no other comments on that item, we come to items of committee interest. Now, this is here kind of as a placeholder for us to consider over the next couple of weeks, coming back next time with a few thoughts on some items that we might want to consider throughout the next year. These are kind of our priorities as members of this committee. What would we like to talk about? So the request is to come back next time with kind of a short list, since we all know how this works at this point. We've been on the council a little while. We know that we are not going to solve all the world's problems here over the next year. So, you know, a list of things that we're really passionate about that we think that we could potentially tackle over the next year. And these sort of serve as almost like parking lot items in that should there be a time where there's space in the agenda for us to bring something forward ourselves, that we could fill it. That said, we do typically have fairly full agendas as we move through the year. So it does become hard to fill that time, but should it arise, that we could put that in there. And just as an example, I just recently found out that Bellevue runs an on-call bus service that is paid for by the lodging tax. And you know, we make some in lodging tax, and in the past we've used that money in a certain way. So as a thought, hey, how much are we actually getting from this? How much would it cost to run, say, one bus during the summer? And do those match up? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But that's just an example of something that I thought we could look at. Councilmember Washington.
Okay, thank you. So items of community interest for parking lot items, should we have that list emailed to the chair, or members just gonna bring their own list? And
You're going to be the chair, so what do you want?
I
How do you
just
want to do
wanna-
it?
yeah, I want to make sure. So
Yeah.
is that people just bring their own list next time, or should we email those
that's-
items to the chair?
That is what we've done in the past. Was you know, over the last couple of years was more or less the first, second meeting. We just kind of came up with a list and the chair retained the list.
Okay.
If you would prefer being the chair next time, email you ahead of time, that'd be great. But also, I think it's nice for the community to hear what it is
Okay.
that we're interested in looking at. And of course, members of the community that watch this would be welcome to join our next meeting and provide public comment and say, here's something that I'd like you folks to consider on the committee. And perhaps that'll end up on the list. Maybe it won't. It depends on what it is, I suppose. But yeah, the way that it worked in the past was the chair retained that list, and occasionally there was a time to bring forward an item from it.
Sounds good.
Would you
Thank
like us to email you ahead of time?
Please.
Okay, then we will do that.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay,
Does that go with you? Councilmember Watt?
excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other items on the agenda? I do not see any good of the order. All right, well then, we are at the end of our agenda. So I will call us this meeting to a close at 6:51. And thank you all for being here. Have a good night. Thank
Good
you.
night.